The galaxy was embroiled in an endless war, an eternal cycle of conquest and defense, where power was measured in fleets and firepower. Empires of different species fought across vast swathes of space, their advanced technology and battle-hardened forces clashing in spectacular displays of destruction. Among these mighty empires, humanity was nothing but an afterthought, a newly emerged species still finding its footing on the galactic stage. The older, more established civilizations regarded humanity with a mixture of disdain and curiosity, seeing them as primitive, disorganized, and most importantly, insignificant. Humanity had begun as an isolated force, limited to a handful of colonies scattered across remote sectors. Their technology was rudimentary compared to the alien empires. They had no warships capable of challenging the massive fleets that now ruled the stars. Despite this, humanity's resourcefulness, creativity, and unyielding resolve had allowed them to survive, and survive well. But survival was all they had achieved so far. In the great galactic scale, humans were little more than an annoyance to the more powerful races. At the center of this fragile human alliance was Captain Elara Vance, a leader in the Human Defense Coalition. She had seen the way the galaxy looked at them, with condescension, with pity. The larger empires cared nothing for the struggles of the human colonies. They had their own wars to fight, their own ambitions to fulfill. Humanity, they believed, was destined to fade away, to be swallowed up by the tide of larger, more powerful forces. Elara had fought her entire career to prove them wrong, but each day brought more evidence of how far humanity still had to go. She sat in her command chair aboard the U.S. Dominion, a mid-range warship equipped with the latest human technology, though still hopelessly outclassed by the galactic powers. The news was grim. Another alien offensive was beginning, this time targeting the human colonies along the edge of known space. The Zarin, an aggressive reptilian race known for their brutal tactics, had launched a surprise attack. They cared little for diplomacy or treaties, and their sheer numbers made them a force to be reckoned with. The Galactic Council, made up of the most powerful species, had issued a token response, an advisory to the human forces to do their best in fending off the invasion. Elara clenched her fists. They had always been left to fend for themselves. The Zarin's attack was not new. It was just another act in the ongoing war that never truly acknowledged humanity's existence. The galactic powers might spare a few resources here and there, but they never made the effort to protect humanity's interests. It was clear now that if humanity was going to survive, they would have to do it on their own. It was a frustrating reality for Elara and every soldier she commanded. They were under-equipped and under-trained compared to the galactic empires. They had no true war machines like the Zelnok, with their massive dreadnoughts that could turn entire fleets into debris with a single shot, or the HFY, whose stealth technology made them invisible to sensors. The human ships were small, resourceful, and often built from salvage and repurposed alien technology. Their fleet had its strengths, but they were far from the mighty armies of the galaxy. Elara's thoughts were interrupted by a comms officer's voice. "Captain, we've intercepted a transmission. The Zarin have initiated a full-scale assault on Valus 4. They've breached our outer defenses and are moving toward the capital." She stood up immediately, her heart pounding in her chest. "Alert the fleet, prepare for battle," she ordered. The situation was worse than they had anticipated. A full assault on a colony world meant nothing less than annihilation. If they didn't act fast, millions of innocent lives would be lost. The human alliance was weak, but the humans themselves were not. Elara had seen the courage of her people up close. She had seen ordinary civilians stand tall against overwhelming odds, showing bravery that no alien species could match. But she also knew that courage alone wouldn't win this war. Humanity had to evolve beyond its role as a mere survivor. It was time to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. "Ready the fleet. All ships prepare for defensive maneuvers. We're going to give them a fight they won't forget," Elara said, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. As the fleet mobilized, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point. Humanity had always been dismissed, its potential ignored. But deep down, she knew the truth. Humans were capable of so much more. They just had to be given the chance to prove it. The first few hours of battle were a blur of flashing lights and the deafening sound of weapons fire. The Zarin had arrived in overwhelming numbers, but humanity had learned from their past mistakes. They fought back fiercely, using every advantage they could find. The Zarin's brute strength was matched by human ingenuity. The battle was chaotic, but it wasn't hopeless. Elara knew the odds were against them, but she had a sense that something was shifting. In the midst of the fighting, a breakthrough came. A human engineer aboard one of the fleet's ships had managed to hack into the Zarin's command network, causing massive disruptions in their communications and fleet coordination. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Elara felt a surge of hope. This was the spark that humanity needed, a glimpse of the ingenuity and potential that lay dormant, waiting to be unleashed. As the battle raged on, Elara knew this was just the beginning. Humanity was about to show the galaxy its true potential. It was time for them to stop being underestimated and start proving their worth. They would no longer be content with mere survival. Humanity would fight, adapt, and ultimately triumph, because that was what they did best. The battle had been brutal, but the humans were still standing. Elara knew that their victory on Valus 4 had been no fluke. It wasn't the strength of their ships or weapons that had won them the day, it was something deeper. It was the drive, the adaptability, and the sheer determination of her people. But that was only the beginning. They had proven they could fight, but now they needed to prove they could win. Back aboard the U.S.S. Dominion, Elara paced the command deck, her mind racing. The Zarin offensive wasn't over. Their forces were still vast, their strategies still dangerous. But now, for the first time, the humans had a taste of what they could do when they worked together. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still so much more to do. They couldn't afford to fight like the others. They had to be better, faster, and smarter. "We need to adapt," she said, her voice sharp. "We can't beat them head-on with conventional tactics. We need to think differently." The crew exchanged glances. They had always known humanity was outmatched, but now it was clear, they had to innovate or die. Elara's eyes fixed on a hollow map of the galaxy's battlefield. The Zarin had deployed new, massive warships, heavily armored and capable of devastating entire fleets with ease. The U.S.S. Dominion had been in a few skirmishes with them, but it was obvious the ship alone couldn't stand up to their full might. But humans had something that the Zarin, along with the other galactic empires, didn't account for: ingenuity. The idea was simple but radical. Instead of trying to overwhelm the Zarin with sheer firepower, they would disrupt their command structure. Humans didn't have the numbers or firepower, but they had resourcefulness. Elara turned to her chief engineer. "We're going to take one of their ships, alive," she said. The engineer looked at her, incredulous. "You want us to board a Zarin warship? You know they're equipped with enough firepower to wipe out entire colonies in a matter of hours." Elara nodded, unfazed. "We'll get close, use their own systems against them, and take control. Their ships are massive, but they rely heavily on central command. If we can get in there, we can break them apart." The idea was risky. Incredibly risky. But Elara knew their best chance was to disrupt the Zarin's operations and throw their forces into disarray. If humanity could get a few of their ships under control, it would be a massive blow to their strategy. The crew agreed, and the plan was set in motion. Within days, the first human strike team boarded a Zarin vessel. The mission was risky, the odds of success slim, but the humans had an advantage. They had no fear of failure, no hesitation in the face of impossible odds. They moved fast, exploiting every weakness, every blind spot. The Zarin's advanced technology was no match for the quick thinking and relentless drive of the humans. Within hours, the human team had taken control of the ship's command systems, throwing the Zarin into chaos. News of the success spread quickly across the fleet. Humanity had taken its first true step toward changing the war. The Zarin were shaken, their once unified command structure crippled. Elara and her team had set the example. Humans weren't bound by the same rules, the same predictability as other species. They could adapt, and they could surprise. As word of the humans' success reached other corners of the galaxy, the reaction was one of disbelief. The Zarin had underestimated them, completely. The HFY, who had long dominated the shadows of galactic warfare with their stealth technologies, found themselves uneasy at the thought that a species so new to the galactic stage could adapt so quickly. Even the Zelnok, the ancient race of warlords, had begun to question whether they had miscalculated the humans' potential. For the first time, the galaxy was forced to recognize the threat humanity posed. Elara watched as their tactics spread, as more and more human ships took the fight to the Zarin with new, unpredictable strategies. Humans didn't have massive fleets, but they had creativity. They could adapt quickly to any situation, using alien technology in ways its creators never intended. They scavenged, reprogrammed, and rebuilt. From the Zarin's own weapons, they crafted new tools of warfare. Their ships became faster, more agile, and far more effective in smaller, hit-and-run engagements. The Zarin's larger, slower warships couldn't keep up with the humans' newfound mobility. Elara knew the war was turning. The Zarin had been caught off guard, but now they were beginning to adapt. Their commanders would learn from their mistakes, and it wouldn't be long before the humans would face new challenges. But that didn't bother Elara. She had seen humanity's true power. They had proven it on Valus 4, and they were proving it now. It wasn't just their technology or weapons that made them dangerous, it was their ability to learn and evolve. The galaxy had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. The first real turning point came when a Zarin flagship was taken down by a small group of human fighters. It wasn't a victory of sheer firepower. No, it was a victory of surprise. A carefully timed strike, exploiting a flaw in the Zarin's defenses that no one had expected. The flagship's shields, designed to be impervious to almost any attack, were brought down by a series of precise, coordinated hits, using alien technology and human ingenuity to overwhelm its systems. When the ship fell, the galactic powers took notice. The Zarin were no longer the only ones making the rules of war. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they could change the course of an entire conflict, not through brute strength, but through unexpected brilliance. The Zarin were on the defensive now, and it was no longer clear who would emerge victorious. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The human underdogs had just struck their first major blow, and it wasn't with sheer force. It was with wit, speed, and a tenacity that no one had seen coming. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. The human fleet had grown more efficient with each passing day, but it was never the firepower, the ships, or even the technology that made humanity a threat. It was something deeper, something that couldn't be measured in starships or weapons. It was a force that had been there all along, a quiet strength that now surged to the surface. Humanity had something no other species had, their ability to unite, to come together in the face of unimaginable odds. In the midst of battle, amidst the constant clash of fleets and the chaos of war, Elara Vance found herself reflecting on the strange nature of human resilience. The galaxy had long mocked humanity as a species doomed to failure, constantly in conflict with itself, plagued by divisions and squabbles. Yet now, in the face of annihilation, those same divisions had been set aside. Mankind, for all their flaws, had come together like never before. Humanity, despite its history of wars, had an incredible ability to unite when it mattered most. The divisions that had once threatened to tear their societies apart, racial, political, and cultural differences, had all but disappeared when the human race faced the existential threat of extinction. Every ship, every soldier, every colony had one thing in common: survival. And with survival came the burning drive to protect one another, to rise up as one. Elara had seen it firsthand on countless battlefields, where soldiers from all walks of life fought side by side. It wasn't a matter of ideology or nationalism anymore, it was about the human spirit. When one human fell, others stepped forward to take their place. And when they fought not just for themselves, but for everyone. This unity, forged in the crucible of war, had made them far more dangerous than any of their alien counterparts could ever understand. And it wasn't just unity that defined them. It was willpower, the sheer, unbreakable resolve to never give up, no matter the odds. The human spirit was a force of nature, and it was now in full force. Alara had seen soldiers, outgunned and outnumbered, hold the line with nothing but their will to survive. They fought with a passion that no alien race could match, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion, only to rise again and again. She remembered a particular moment during the early days of the conflict. A small human outpost had been surrounded by Zarin forces. The outpost was barely equipped to handle the invasion, but its defenders refused to yield. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, they held their ground. When ammunition ran low, they fought hand to hand. When their communication systems were jammed, they relied on improvised signals. In the end, they didn't just survive, they drove the Zarin off. It wasn't through superior weapons or tactics. It was through sheer will. The message was clear: humanity would never give up. This was the strength that the galactic powers had failed to account for. They had underestimated humanity's ability to endure, to outlast their enemies. It was a quality that couldn't be measured in terms of fleet size or advanced weaponry. It was the refusal to break, to bend, no matter how dire the circumstances. As word of human victories spread across the galaxy, the alien coalition began to notice something strange. The Zarin, usually known for their unrelenting attacks, were beginning to hesitate. Their leaders were confused. The Zelnok, with their centuries of war experience, couldn't understand why a relatively primitive species could fight back with such tenacity. The HFY, silent observers of war for millennia, were growing uneasy. How could humans, a species that had just recently discovered space travel, stand toe-to-toe with galactic empires that had been waging war for centuries? The Zarin's first response was to escalate their attacks, to overwhelm humanity with even greater force. But even that failed. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, the human forces would find a way out. The Zarin could not break them. The humans' resilience, their unity, and their refusal to yield were qualities the galaxy had never seen before. And the aliens were starting to realize that this was no ordinary species. They were not just fighting soldiers, they were fighting the very will of a species determined to survive. The alien disbelief turned into fear. For the first time, the galaxy's established powers were beginning to question their own superiority. How could a species that hadn't even mastered the art of war on their own planet manage to withstand an empire like the Zarin? The humans were proving that they could outthink, outmaneuver, and most importantly, outlast their enemies. The galaxy watched as one by one, human forces turned the tide in battles that should have been lost. Their ability to adapt, to turn the tables, was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And Alara, though she had always believed in the human spirit, began to understand the full weight of what her people were capable of. As the leader of the human fleet, she was no longer just a military commander. She had become a symbol of humanity's willpower. She had watched her people rise from the fringes of galactic conflict to become a force that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't about technology, it wasn't about firepower. It was about the human will to fight, to survive, and to protect those they loved. Alara's growth as a leader mirrored the growth of humanity as a whole. The first few battles had been fought out of necessity, but now, with each victory, humanity's purpose was becoming clearer. They were no longer just struggling to survive, they were fighting for something greater. They were fighting for their place in the galaxy, for their future, and for the idea that they could never be conquered, no matter how great the odds. As humanity continued to surprise their enemies with their resilience, the galaxy began to question everything they thought they knew. No longer was it certain that the Zarin, or the Zelnok, or any of the other mighty empires would emerge victorious. Humanity had shown them that even the greatest powers could be undone by the sheer will of a species that refused to give up. And with each passing day, it became clearer to the galaxy: the true power of humanity was not in their ships or weapons, it was in their hearts. The alien coalition had made its final push, confident that humanity's resistance could no longer stand against their overwhelming might. The Zarin, Zelnok, and HFY, united in their belief that the war was all but over, were preparing to deliver the final blow to the human colonies. Their fleets had converged on the last remaining human stronghold, a position they believed would bring an end to the conflict. It was meant to be the end of the road for humanity, a crushing blow that would extinguish the flicker of hope the humans had sparked. But the aliens had underestimated something they could not comprehend: the human will to survive. Ilara Vance stood on the command deck of the U.S. Dominion, eyes focused on the holographic battlefield that stretched across the room. The odds were insurmountable, but it no longer mattered. Humanity had evolved. The pieces were in place. The final offensive wasn't just about holding the line, it was about turning the tide of the entire war. "We're ready," Ilara said quietly, her voice unwavering. She turned to her officers, each one standing at attention, their faces marked with exhaustion, but also a fierce determination. "This ends today." Her plan was simple in theory but executed with a precision and audacity that only humanity could pull off. It wasn't just about outgunning the aliens, it was about exploiting their weaknesses. The Zarin relied on brute force, their tactics predictable and heavy-handed. The Zelnok were masters of psychological warfare, but they underestimated humanity's resolve. And the HFY, silent and elusive, had failed to grasp just how deeply humanity could adapt to any challenge. Humanity's counteroffensive began with a series of calculated strikes, seemingly random, but with purpose behind each one. Small groups of human ships, working in tight coordination, attacked vulnerable supply lines, ambushed isolated patrols, and made it clear that no part of the alien coalition was safe. It was guerrilla warfare at a galactic scale. The aliens, expecting a direct confrontation, were thrown off balance. The humans weren't fighting the way they had before. No longer were they a disorganized, underpowered species. They had become an unpredictable, mobile force capable of striking at any weak point in the enemy's vast empire. But it wasn't just their adaptability that was proving the difference. Humans had learned to play the psychological game better than any of their enemies. They spread misinformation, sowed confusion, and created chaos within the alien ranks. Their ability to think outside the box, to turn the tables at a moment's notice, had become their greatest asset. Then came the turning point. A sudden shift in strategy by the humans left the Zarin forces reeling. A small, seemingly insignificant strike force of human ships, led by Ilara herself, launched a daring raid on the Zarin Command Center, one of the coalition's most heavily defended installations. The Zarin were taken completely by surprise. Ilara's forces used the Zarin's own technology against them, jamming communications, scrambling their targeting systems, and infiltrating their defenses with a combination of human ingenuity and reprogrammed alien tech. The result was a crippling blow to the Zarin leadership. In a matter of hours, their entire fleet was thrown into disarray. Their flagship, the heart of their command structure, was incapacitated, leaving the entire fleet without direction. The impact was immediate. The Zarin forces, once a well-oiled machine, now floundered. In one bold move, Ilara had demonstrated that humanity could achieve what no one believed was possible. The battle raged on, but with the Zarin leadership in disarray, humanity's forces began to overwhelm the enemy. Ships that had once been outgunned and outnumbered were now making coordinated strikes against the alien fleets. With each victory, the humans proved that their strength didn't come from their technology alone, it came from their unity, their resolve, and their ingenuity. The tide of war had turned. As the battle stretched on, other alien factions began to reassess their position. The Zelnok, who had watched from the sidelines, were the first to falter. The HFY followed suit. Both factions, seeing the inevitable collapse of the Zarin forces, began to question their own role in the conflict. The human resilience was impossible to ignore. Slowly but surely, the galaxy's major factions began to recognize the undeniable truth: humanity was no longer the underdog. Peace talks began in earnest, with many factions now seeking to enter negotiations with the humans. They had proven themselves in the heat of battle, and the aliens could no longer deny that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Even those who had once dismissed the human race as primitive now had to concede. The humans had earned their place at the table. The final, decisive moment of the war came when Ilara's forces launched a final strike against the last remaining alien stronghold, a massive installation on the planet Zar, the coalition's primary command center. It was the heart of their military operations. If they lost Zar, they would lose the war. Ilara knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. The humans moved with precision, overwhelming the defenses with a combination of brute force and brilliant tactics. Ilara led the charge herself, coordinating with ground troops and fleet commanders to execute the final assault. The aliens were caught off guard once again, their superiority shattered by the relentless, calculated human approach. The Zaran forces were decimated, their command structure obliterated. In the end, Zar fell, one of the most significant victories in galactic history. When the dust settled, the galaxy was forever changed. Humanity, once dismissed as a weak, primitive species, had decisively won the war. They had proven to the galaxy that their greatest strength was not their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was their unity, their adaptability, and their willpower. And in that final battle, humanity had earned their place among the stars. No longer would they be overlooked. No longer would they be underestimated. The galaxy had learned the hard way that when humans mobilized, war would indeed be over fast. The war had ended, and the galaxy was now a very different place. The alien forces that once threatened humanity's survival had either retreated or been forced into negotiations. The Zaran, Zelnok, and HFY were no longer the towering giants of the galaxy. Now they were cautious, even humble, in the presence of humanity, whose tenacity and determination had reshaped the balance of power. Humanity had fought with everything they had and emerged victorious. It was a victory that had cost lives, that had left scars, but it was one that no one could ever take away from them. They had earned their place among the stars. Ilara Vance stood before the Grand Council chamber, the silence around her almost suffocating. The walls were adorned with flags of various alien factions, a reminder of the fragile peace that had been brokered. The war was over, but the work was far from done. The Council was in the midst of discussing the new galactic order, one in which humanity would play a pivotal role. The humans had once been dismissed as an insignificant species, primitive, disorganized, and easily overwhelmed. But that was no longer the case. The war had proven humanity's worth, and now they were seen as a force to be reckoned with. The once dismissive alien factions were now forced to sit at the same table as the humans, offering respect where there had once been disdain. Ilara reflected on the path that had brought them here. When the war had first started, humanity had been fighting for survival. They had been the underdog, underestimated by every alien species they encountered. But the sheer willpower of humanity, their ability to adapt, innovate, and unite, had turned the tide. The final victory had been won not through brute force, but through ingenuity, resilience, and an unyielding belief in the possibility of a better future. It was a future that now seemed within reach. The cost of the war weighed heavily on her. Countless lives had been lost, both human and alien. The destruction had been immense. The damage was not just physical, but psychological, as well. But there was also a deep sense of pride in what humanity had achieved. The human race had proven that no matter how great the odds, they would not be broken. They had faced down the greatest powers the galaxy had to offer and had emerged victorious, not as equals, but as something more, something the galaxy could no longer ignore. Humanity's place in the galaxy had shifted dramatically. No longer were they the fringe species on the edge of galactic space. They were now a powerful player in the galactic community, respected by many, feared by others. The major alien factions, who once viewed humanity with disdain, now approached them with caution and even admiration. The Zaran, once the vanguard of the coalition, now had to consider the possibility that their military might could no longer guarantee victory. The HFY, silent for so long, had begun to acknowledge the strategic brilliance of human commanders. Even the Zelnok, masters of psychological warfare, had been forced to reckon with humanity's ability to outthink and outlast them. But while the war had brought humanity recognition, it had also brought new responsibilities. With power came the need for diplomacy, cooperation, and the careful navigation of alliances. The peace talks were just the beginning. Humanity's leaders, like Ilara, were now tasked with shaping a new era of intergalactic relations, one where old grudges would have to be set aside, and new alliances formed. The human race had proven that they could fight and win, but now they would have to prove that they could lead. As Ilara looked out over the council chamber, she saw the faces of the human delegates, brave men and women who had fought in the war, who had survived the darkest days, and who now stood as symbols of humanity's resilience. They had earned this moment, earned the right to sit at the table alongside the galaxy's greatest powers. But there was still much to be done. The tension in the room was palpable. Old wounds had not healed, and there were still factions who would rather fight than negotiate. But the human delegation stood firm, unwavering in their resolve. They had won the war, and now they would fight for peace. Ilara's thoughts turned inward as she reflected on her own journey. She had once been a simple officer, tasked with leading her people through one of the darkest chapters of their history. But through it all, she had seen humanity at its best, united, resilient, and determined. She had witnessed the sacrifices, the triumphs, and the courage of every human who had fought for this new future. She had become a symbol of humanity's strength, not because of her rank or position, but because she had never wavered in her belief that humanity could overcome anything. The war had changed her. It had changed everyone. The horrors they had faced, the losses they had endured, had left scars, but they had also forged a new humanity. A humanity that no longer looked inward, divided by petty conflicts and differences, but one that had learned the value of unity. A humanity that had learned how to survive in the face of annihilation, to adapt to any challenge, and to never back down, no matter the cost. Ilara stepped away from the council table, her gaze drifting to the stars beyond the station's windows. She could see the faint light of distant worlds, worlds that were now part of the broader galactic community. The peace that had been forged was fragile, but it was real. Humanity had earned their place in the galaxy, not through conquest, but through the strength of their will, their ingenuity, and their unshakable resolve. As she stood there, looking out at the stars, Ilara couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the future. The war was over, but this was just the beginning. Humanity had proven that they were no longer a side player in galactic politics. They had proven that when they came together, nothing could stand in their way. And as the galaxy watched, humanity would rise to heights no one had ever thought possible. This was the dawn of a new age for humanity, a new beginning, one where their place in the stars was no longer a question. It was their time now, and nothing would ever take that away.